Several flights were diverted from O.R Tambo International Airport to other airports this past weekend to refuel due to regular fuel supply challenges at the airport. The airport's company, South Africa, has provided assurance that efforts are underway to ensure the continued supply of jet fuel at the O.R Tambo International Airport in Kempton Park. Well, to elaborate on what's been happening and the possible solutions, I'm joined by Terence Delomoney. He's the Group Executive of Operations at ACSA. Thank you so much for joining us, Terence. So this fuel supply shortage issue appears to be a fairly long-standing one. As far back as early December last year, we heard about travellers being delayed due to similar problems. What exactly is the issue and how long has it been going on for?
Good afternoon, Nampu. So this current issue that we referring to relates directly to a fire that was experienced at the Natref refinery that happened on the 4th of January. And Natref, as the refinery, supplies about 72% of the fuel requirements at O.R Tambo International Airport. Obviously, then with the fire, the indications are the repairs will be completed around the 21st of February, which means we can start getting the regular supply of fuel around the 27th of February. So that meant ACSA, Airports Company South Africa, together with all of the various industry role players, and in particular the Fuels Industry Association of South Africa, whose members are really the large petroleum companies, had to look at what are the alternative arrangements that can be made in order to mitigate the risk of a stock out of fuel at O.R Tambo. So I just want to reiterate, Tambo, there's not been a stock out of fuel at O.R Tambo. In fact, as we operate, there's been fuel available at the airport. Today we sit on about 28 million litres of fuel. We average between 3 million and 3.6 million litres a day in terms of usage. And the plan is then, how do we ensure that come end of January, as we enter the first week of February and beyond, that the fuel industry associations, together with the oil companies, are able to make alternative arrangements and bring in alternative stock. And up to date, there's been great collaboration with those stakeholders, and they've done very well by bringing in additional stock of fuel that comes in as imported fuel through Durban. It gets pumped through via the pipeline from Durban and is able then to mitigate that risk. So to clarify, there's been no fuel shortage at O.R Tambo since this incident has happened. When you refer to diversions over the weekend, there were no such diversions over the weekend. However, what happens is that whilst we have an overall supply of stock, as I indicated, 28 million litres as I last looked at it this morning, there are certain companies that may stock out, because remember, that's an overall stock supply, and their customers, who are the airlines, would be informed by these companies to actually make alternative arrangements to secure some of this fuel. And airlines then are at liberty to make those alternative arrangements. And those alternative arrangements would be to either bring in additional fuel from their points of origin, or they could do what we call technical stops and refuel at other stations and bring in that fuel. So that is the current situation, Nampu, at the moment.
So operations at ACSA in terms of planes coming in and going out have not been disrupted because of fuel constraints that come from ACSA?
Correct. And so there's not, I have indicated there are certain airlines, particularly international airlines, that need to make alternative arrangements, which we are aware of. So, for example, we have King Shaka International Airport, which is also an ACSA airport. Because their fuel uplift is less than what it is at O.R Tambo, they might have the ability to carry additional stock, so those airlines can make a technical stop there, refuel, and come through. But that's purely dependent on what their fuel suppliers are telling them.
Yeah. So what lessons have been drawn or learnt from what's happened? Because obviously you guys run a very strategic, critically important service, for for trade, for travel. It's critically important. What lessons have you learned? Because presumably you do need to have a doomsday plan for, have different scenarios for the possibility of, limited fuel for whatever reason, because you can't foresee.
Absolutely, Nompo. And in fact, over the last few years, the issue of fuel security of fuel supply in the country is really a strategic issue that needs to be addressed. So I talk fuel supply in general, but let me be specific on jet fuel supply. So really what's happened over the last few years, we've had a number of refineries that used to operate, five refineries in the country that used to refine this jet fuel. We're now down to 2 refineries, which is the Natref refinery where the incident has happened, and we have the Astron refinery that's in Cape Town. So what it means is that we are reliant to a larger extent on imported jet fuel than we've previously done. And obviously one of the key things that needs to happen is the formulation of a policy to have a strategic reserve of jet fuel in the country, so we are able to buffer any of these incidents that might happen. Now, the contingencies and the learnings that we have taken as ACSA, as the aviation industry, including the airlines, including the oil companies, is that in order to mitigate some of these operational risks, we've got to a point of trying to increase operational buffer stock. So there was a point in time when the operational buffer stock that was held was about 3 to 5 days. We managed to, with all of these role players, build that up to about 7 or 8 days. And in fact, it's because of that we are able to absorb a little bit of the shock of what's happened now in January. However, that's not sufficient, as you correctly indicate, because if we have an issue that's gonna disrupt us for a longer period of time, we need to have access to stock that's a strategic stock holding that's over and above this operational buffer stock that we have. So on that note, there's been several discussions with the, it used to be called the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. They're now the Department of Mineral Resources and Petroleum. And there's been several discussions with the department, and they have been on this and looking at ways in which this can be implemented. Obviously, it's not been implemented as yet, and those are discussions that are ongoing. So that's one of the key things that must happen. There's other elements around how we've managed to improve on contingencies. So, for example, when we had the incident way back in April 22, where we had the floods, and there was a large amount of fuel coming in from Durban on rail, and remember the rail lines were washed away. There's then been a move towards using the multi-product pipeline, which is able to bring in bigger volumes of fuel from Durban and get it pumped into OR Tambo directly now, as well as into the Natref facility. So those are logistical arrangements and contingencies that have been put in place in order to mitigate such a risk.
All right. Terence, thank you very much for outlining in such great detail for us what you're doing to ensure that you're sustainable and able to operate. Thank you so much for your time, sir. That was Terence Delomoney. He's the Group Executive for Operations at ACSA.